Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today we're going to do a fast and loose tonalist watercolor landscape painting, exploring one tube of paint. I purchased a small tube, very small tube, of Van Dyke Brown from Daniel Smith, and I wanted to give it a try compared to the other Van Dyke Browns. Think about maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I was playing around with them from either Cotman or the Van Gogh brand, and I believe those were a mixture of 2 pigments. So this is a single one, PR7, and I'm curious if it's just the preparation of it or what. But that being said, I'm just going to lace them out and have fun and just paint with it. So let's get started. Quarter sheet Stonehenge Aqua, thoroughly saturated, 100% cotton, 140 pound cold press. I have the medium hake brush that I'm going to utilize. And here we go. Okay, this has definitely a different feel and different color right off the bat than the other Van Dyke Browns. The Van Dyke Brown usually has like a nice chocolatey type color to it. That's a good way to explain it. It's named after the browns used by the artist Van Dyke. But that being said, it feels more muted. Let's see. It's kind of like really thrown off. I was expecting definitely a different brown. Almost feels like a neutral tint or something. All right, I'm going to use the paper towel. Anyway, so we'll play around with it. We'll see how it builds up and how it develops. I have the blue shop rag, the paper towel, and I'm going to utilize that along with the hake back and forth to build up the scene. So paper towel to be subtractive and create texture, while the hake is also going to be adding texture, but it's going to be adding pigment back in, as well as adding water back into spots. So with this approach that I have, I really don't think I developed it or anything like that. I think Mind of Watercolor does something similar where he puts the pigment out and lets it flow around. And there's a lot of other fast and loose painters that let the painting just take place. But for me, I had looked at the paintings of Stuart Davies and Dennis Sheehan, 2 modern oil painters in the tonalist style, who will thin their pigments down. They'll use 2 or 3 pigments and just pass it around the smooth surface that they're painting on, using a paper towel, Q-tips to wipe back and forth and to create their scene. So I just kind of transcribed that approach to watercolor, and I also use it with other materials, but the watercolor, it's really fun, very relaxing, and allows you to just let loose. Stuart Davies has a YouTube video with just probably hundreds of thousands of views, with the Illusion of Detail, I believe is the title of it, which is a great name. Just rather than sitting there and painting every single leaf and every single branch, every single blade of grass, you can play around and create those feelings to it. Now that isn't specific to Stuart Davies. A lot of people have done that. In fact, I was watching a little bit of Bob Ross season 1, which I think was 1982. Might be the year, I might be wrong. Anyway, he had said how he originally was a traditional style painter, and he took on the approach that he had, which I think was developed by Bill Alexander and probably somebody before him, where they'd get a painting done that looks like hours upon days was spent on it in a minimal time period. So I'm going to use a scraping tool to kind of damage the paper. With this scrape, it's going to cause backfills, and you'll see those dark lines that start to form. If you use a rounder edge or a wider edge, you'll kind of create a white line while you push the pigment out of it. If you scrape at a different stage in the painting, maybe it's slightly drier than where it is now, you'll also potentially get those white lines. The back of the nail will give white lines pretty easily in this stage. If I go in, nope, not getting it yet. So I stand corrected. Are we getting any white? No. You can use the wider, flatter side of scraping tool. I'm just creating my scene. I like the granulation of this pigment. I think that is going to be one of the winning aspects of this tube. Chocolatey wise, it's not where I want it to be at so far. We'll play around with the #1 rigger, and we'll go into it and I'll actually blab a little bit more about that Van Dyke color. I do a alternative printing process called the brown print, or the Van Dyke print. It wasn't invented by him. It was, I think, theorized or invented in the 1840s, around the time cyanotype took place. But they couldn't get it to the image to stay. It was based around silver nitrate. The process for getting the image to stay, I think, was 1880, 1890, and I think that's when it was maybe patented, potentially. But by then, a lot more easier printing processes were taking place, a lot of more quicker processes. So it didn't really become prominent. Essentially, I'll take paper and I'll coat it with the Van Dyke solution, which I get from Bostitch and Sullivan. And you want to be careful, because working with anything that has silver nitrate in it, if you get it in your eye, it could potentially blind you, legit, just straight up blind you. So you just have to be careful with that. I'm going to put out a little bit more pigment while I talk about that. And then from there, you coat your paper, you place either your processed film, or you could have maybe a printout on a transparency, and you put your negative on top of it. Then you expose it to UV light, For me, I've built little UV light boxes, but you can expose it to the sun outside. Let's just put a little bit more pigment. You can see how the paper's still wet and wet. But we're trying to run it through its paces and see what type of range of values we can get from this. Okay, so back to the Van Dyke print process. So after you expose it to your UV light, you make sure you don't expose it to any other UV light before you then put it in a acidic bath, I believe for about 5 minutes, agitating that water. That will, so what you scratching at? So that'll start developing your image. Then I believe I put it in a regular water bath to remove some of the acid from it, the citric acid that I use, because it could kind of contaminate the next step, which is then a bath of platinum or palladium or gold toner. What that does is replace the silver particles with gold or platinum or palladium particles. It doesn't make it look gold, it doesn't make it look silver. It's just what your image is being created by, the black and white, and then it starts changing the tone. But it also is more archival. Those metals are more resistant to fading. Then from there, I'll have to look at my notes, but you then have to put it in a fixative, which removes your excess silver and whatnot. Then you go into a hypo, I think it's a hypo. So you then go into your wash water. Yeah, it's a long process. It's quite tedious. Let's grab the number 4. We're still going wet and wet, but try to put a thicker tree in. The number 4 rigger holds more pigment, more water. Okay, so I think I don't watch my videos. I have a hard time listening to my own voice. And I think that's common for most people. That being said, I'm pretty sure at the beginning of this video, I had probably audibly made a face where you probably heard maybe my disappointment in this tube and the color that it was. That it wasn't that rich chocolate brown that I was anticipating. That being said, and I'm saying this before any dry off, I don't like that X that's taking place right there. I'm gonna try to watch that out. Okay. Not having done a dry off yet, so we don't know how it'll soften or not. It does have a really interesting, like, just vibe to it. Just, I don't know if it's the antique nature of it. Bringing my reflections down, a bit shadow, so whatever light from here. Maybe it's the granulation along with this color that it has, but there's something to it that is really just speaking to me. We haven't tried any foliage or anything like that. I don't think I need to really worry too much in that regard. We could put some foliage in if we want, maybe a little bit sparse for the scene. Or we could go in fully. If this doesn't have a tonal shift, if this stays relatively where it's at when we do a dry off, which I'll probably do in a few just so we can see, I will be very, very happy. I would probably buy a big tube of this and use it as one of the bag of tricks material. Create a little S-shaped composition back here. All right, so we're going to save some for our after we dry off the paint. So let's pause this and we'll see how it lightens up. All right, so it's pretty dry. Some areas feel a little cooler than others. We did get a tonal shift take place, meaning that it lightened up as we dried it off, which is to be expected with watercolors. Pretty much every one of them does it to one degree or another. But so far, I'm happy with the tonal range that we have. The granulation and the texture that was occurring here and here, but then we don't have it here. So I'm not quite sure what would cause that difference. I believe that sometimes granulation can be affected by the water that you use and maybe even the paper that you use. I'm not too up and up on the granulation subject. Some people chase that quality in their watercolors, and some pigments and some brands will say if it's granulating or not. In fact, let's see if it says anything on the tube. No, it does not. They might say it on the website if they if it's granulating or not. All right, I'm going to put out more straight from the tube. That's the one negative about the tonalist approach with the wet and wet. Whenever using one or two pigments, you do have a tendency to go through more paint than you would using other approaches. And usually I'm using Cotman brand or Da Vinci brand, Van Gogh brand, which is kind of more student grade, bordering on professional grade, because there's professionals that use those. But price-wise and quantity-wise, you're less prone to kind of freaking out about how much you're using and going through. That's one of the big things with a lot of art, is being too timid in regards to the material that you're using, being worried about going through it and wasting it. I'm experiencing that personally right now, playing with the Conte crayons and the charcoal, where I need to sharpen it to get to better points, but through the sharpening process I'm whittling down a stick of Conte or a pencil of Conte quite a bit. So I'm like, do I save the powder and try applying that with my thumb and play around with it there? Or is that just part of the game that you're going to do that? So that's just one thing to keep in mind, that it's very easy to restrict yourself. For instance, let's say you bought some Stonehenge Aqua, or let's go even further, let's say you bought some Arches watercolor paper. Arches a pad of it, or let's do a sheet. A sheet of it, I think, is about $7 online if you were to buy it off of Blick or Jerry's Artorama. So if you were to buy those and you were to spend that money on, you might think, okay, this is expensive paper, so let me cut it down and play around with it. So cutting it down, you might cut it down to a 5x7, something like that. And then you paint on it, but you're restricting yourself to a really small 5x7 area. And that is kind of an example of how you could potentially hold yourself back from exploring. And sometimes you think to yourself, oh, this is going to go through so quick. And it does at times, but not as quick as you think. So allow yourself to play around on a larger scale and see if you like it. Yeah, Hammy. Hammy agrees. He says, go for it. So my dry brush, we're painting on the dry paper. We're getting our darker values. We haven't done a dry off yet for this layer. I'm curious to see how that will go. Very atmospheric tube of paint. I'm really enjoying it. Hammy, you want to come on my lap? So I think I told you all how Hammy has his own chair next to me for whenever I paint. And he has figured out how to put his front paws on my right thigh, so his body's there, and his back legs are on the other bench. What do you think, Hammy? You like it? Let's see. Let's grab the hake for a little smattering of foliage. Now when doing this, watch for the stamping effect, meaning repeated patterns that can take place using a texturing device. So I'm trying to avoid it looking like I'm using the same mark over and over again. There is quite a bit of water on it, so we are going to get a lighter foliage feel. Pull a little bit on the side. And if you pass back over some of those spots, you're then going to be creating just essentially a wet and wet spot. And you'll start losing whatever texture you're trying to create, which is okay if your goal is to build up a new wet and wet spot or to diffuse that texture there. Here's the number one. I'm trying to weave in and out of that foliage we just put in. Compositionally, let's bring this out a little bit more. We could have a little grassy edge coming up and out. I think what we're going to wind up doing is one last dry off, seeing how it looks at that point, and then from there. Passing a little bit more pigment. Okay, so what we'll do is do our dry off. We'll see how it looks at that, and then we'll go to the next stage. All right, so here's our second dry off. And while I had the blow dry on one hand, I was digging through my paints with my other. Here is Burnt Umber, PBR7. So the same pigment. I'm thinking that it's just the processing of the pigment. I think that raw umber is PBR7 as well. So if you didn't know anything about that pigment, let me know down below. I'm curious what they're doing with it. That being said, Cotman Van Dyke Brown is PBR7 plus PR101. I believe the PR101 is your burnt sienna, your light red oxide, your kind of rust red. So Cotman, I think, is essentially just taking a burnt umber and mixing light red oxide with it, or raw sienna, like making that combination. While Van Dyke Brown, I think, from Daniel Smith, is processing it differently, just the pigment. So that's just a little ideas and speculation. And of course, you're always welcome to follow along with one of these videos. And you don't have to have the pigments that I'm working with. You don't have to have the brand that I'm working with. I'm not sponsored by any brands, or I don't receive any pigments from anybody. That being said, hey, if anybody wants to send me pigments or tubes, let me know. I would love to play around with them on this channel. I have been fortunate enough to have, when I had first started filming, I was filming a lot with, and playing a lot with Noodler's fountain pen inks. And the brand that carries Noodler's, the kind of distributor, had sent me a fountain pen that they were just coming out with. And that was really cool, so that was exciting. Also, I mentioned another YouTuber, Mr. Mark. He had changed the handle on YouTube. He had sent me some paints and brushes to play around with, and the scraping tool that I used, was handmade by him. So that's always really awesome. And some tools that I've worked with, paint pans, have been given to me by local artists or other people. And that's the great thing about the art community. For the most part, everybody's really nice and friendly and helpful. In fact, me and Joe Menza and Matthew Clemens, we moderate a Facebook page, Ron Ranson Disciples, where we have the fast and loose hake brush painters. We did our first kind of Zoom meeting yesterday. We filmed it and put it up on YouTube, and the reception has just been overwhelmingly positive to that. So I'm looking to kind of film more and do more art discussions with them, and get the art community involved in that. Just kind of building up the foliage. I think I will wind up leaving it at this. I don't think I'm going to put any more trees in. Maybe I'll put some more branches in. We'll just see how this develops, and then we'll dry it up and sign it. I will start kind of wrapping up the video and giving my impressions. I'm very thrown off by the Van Dyke Brown color that I'm getting from this. Completely forefront with that, where it just feels more muted. I really anticipated, I keep using the word chocolate, a more chocolate brown, which I had gotten with the cotton and which I had gotten with the Van Dyke printing process. So I kind of went into unnecessary detail with that process for y'all, but hopefully you found that interesting. That being said, I do like the atmospheric feeling of this tube of paint. Being that it's single pigment, I don't know if it could be mixed, if that makes sense. I'm not really that on the up and up with the color theory. Probably be a question for Jane Blendle to ask her about that. And plus, I think she is a big Daniel Smith user. Unfortunately, I haven't ever communicated with her. She has a lot of information on her website. The granulating aspect that we saw in the beginning, I really enjoyed that as well. And I think overall it just has a nice vibe to it. So let's dry it off and we'll sign it and we'll call it. All right, very pleased with this. Please like, subscribe, follow. If you have any questions, let me know. You are more than welcome to follow along. Anything you do when you follow on this channel, you're more than welcome to sign your name. And you have my express permission to sell anything you do whenever you follow any of my tutorials. I want you guys to be successful and have money for art supplies. If you want to support this channel, I have links down below. That is greatly appreciated and goes to art supplies. Let me know if there's any other single tube paintings you'd like me to try out or try to pick up. And check out that video of me, Matthew Clemens, and Joe Menza having an art discussion. On that note, thank you for watching. Y'all take care and have a great day. Bye.